reflection of God's image. Well, He has endowed us with many attributes. The seed of the attributes of God are sown within ourselves as individuals. When we allow them to grow and develop, they become fruitful trees. In other words, we become the embodiment of those perfect human attributes.
There are so many beautiful qualities in humans that really shine and are really warm your heart and can uplift you. And I don't think that I've considered part of me is oh, it's just biological, but I think it's more than that.
A reflection of God's image, I think, means that we have certain characteristics that resemble God or divine nature.
It's hard because I think a lot of the things that we understand, it's our understanding, we can't ever really comprehend God. But if you think about everything that's good in this life, when someone's kind, all those virtues like patience and joy and unity.
Because when we were born, God gave us all these virtues that if we try our best every day, you can manifest them. So those are in small ways, we get to reflect what God gave us, all these gifts and gems.
From love and honesty and truthfulness, all those resemble God and God. If we read in the Baha'i writings, for instance, at the end of all the prayers, it says that He's the all-glorious, He's the all-wise. It's all these things that we could reflect, and therefore we are made with the potential of reflecting the image of God.
Our spiritual attributes, let's say our virtues, everything that's good of us is a reflection of God. Because when I first start to explain the idea of God with some of my friends, I would say, well, why don't you just add an extra O to it, right? So instead of God, just imagine it as good. So it's God is good. God is the accumulation of all good. This is a very limited description of God, but I find that it helps with trying to grapple with this very abstract and just difficult concept. Yeah, so everything that is good in human beings is a reflection of God, basically.
God is love. You hear that all the time. Well, that's massive. It's bigger than anything that you could ever imagine and more. If you think of God, at least how I think of God, is He's the most pure, pristine being that there possibly, energy source that there possibly could be to exist. Everything that's good on earth, everything that's a good expression, every good action, that therefore has to be a mirror of God, because God is the most perfect. So anytime that a human shows a little bit of perfection and they're actually, they do something that's kind for someone else or something generous, those other things, that's a godly act, because that's an act from the soul. That's you connecting to someone else in a positive way, and God can only be a positive thing. So I think that's what it means to me, at least. We're created in God's image. Not God's image is in and no one's God, nothing like that, but it's just your reflection of the good parts, which is, He's the good parts, so.
When you say God made man in His image, as the Bible does say, it's never intended to say that we become like little gods, not at all. But it does mean that His divine attributes are to a great degree deposited in us to work for and exemplify.
But since God is not a physical thing and can't be reflected in a mirror, it's a metaphorical mirror, and therefore the reflections are also metaphorical and not physical reflections.
So to be a reflection of God's image, it's important to make the distinction that we are not ourselves God, but we exhibit the qualities or characteristics of God like a mirror. And we think about a mirror and we think about the sun, and although we can never be close to the sun, if we were to look at the sun in a mirror, we would gain a certain understanding of it, or the mirror then exhibits certain qualities of the sun, but not all of the qualities. And so we think of ourselves like that mirror, also exhibiting some of those qualities of the sun, but we will never be able to be the sun.
We represent characteristics of Him in terms of virtues, but I don't think God walks around with 10 fingers and 10 toes, and more like a spiritual reflection, right? If God is the sun, we're the mirror reflecting the sun. So we're not God, but we reflect His image, right? And then we can get into it, but that's a good one that I like, that I would use.
So I think for me it's, I don't get bogged down in reflection, because then you start getting too physical, and I think that's exactly not the point of it. I think it's about virtues and qualities you can have and you can develop. Things like courtesy, kindness, generosity, thoughtfulness.
And there's that quote, regard mankind as a mind rich in gems of inestimable wealth. So it's bringing out those gems, virtues in ourselves, but also recognizing it in other people. And I think that's the relationship we want to establish.
I think one can look at that within oneself and look at that within others. I mean, clearly, when one sees immense human suffering, immense injustice to other human beings, the message of religion is that all humanity are reflections of God's creation. In the years from 1797 to 1837, when the British Empire was eventually being persuaded to discontinue the slave trade, Josiah Wedgwood, the potter, designed a ceramic symbol of an enslaved person that read, "Am I not a man and a brother?" There was another one, "Am I not a woman and a sister?" Which basically said to a ostensibly Christian society, how can you possibly visit these mass crimes, these obscene abominations on human beings who claim to be Christian, because God is created in your image. So I think empathy, whether it is 300 years ago or what we see in our world today, calls us to see all of humanity as reflections of God's creation.
I think it's gotten us into, as a human race, it's gotten us into a lot of trouble because we only see God as being male or female. And for a long time, people are like, well, God is white and what you gonna do about it? You know, of course, it's very human to relate to God and be like, well, God's just like me. A little bit like our human narcissistic tendency. You know, we always like put ourselves in the middle and everything else is like for us, you know? And I think relating to God in just that one way can cause some trouble. And I think we need to really broaden how we see God. Because if God is just like me, well, then God can be just like you. And God can be just like that person walking down the street. So I think that's where the disconnect comes. It's like God is just not this, you know, God is so much more.
If we can see God in everybody and that we say hi to the person who passes us on the street, you know, if we can see the qualities or just say to a stranger, I see you, I see God in you, you are worthy. I think that's the relationship that God has with us and we have to develop with the rest of humanity. And I think if we can do that, bring unity, right? It says in the writings, we won't have peace until we have unity. So we have to acknowledge the oneness of mankind. We are all created creatures of God, and we have to acknowledge that in others.
I see God in people in maybe different ways, that I can, the way who they are and the energy that they give out, the type of beauty that the inner soul that I see, that to me I think is how I would explain God.
I believe that when I think about God, it can be in the way that we live as well. I think that we can embody, not that we are like gods ourselves, but that we can live like good lives. And that's sort of the point, and that's the purpose. And yeah, so I don't know. I feel it has to be, it's not just about us now. It's about leaving the earth better than we left it. I think that that's all part of it. And so, yeah, it can't just be about the way that we live now and then we leave. I think we have to think about our ancestors, we have to think about our descendants, and really, I think that embodying sort of the purpose of that. And that, I mean, that's a longer conversation.
And so this idea of perfection and the depth of the writings, which should tell you this upper level of how we must strive to, and how beautiful it is, and how just glorious. If you were to let your heart burn with loving kindness for all who may cross your path, even if this person who hates you and spites you, that you can have love, burning loving kindness, that it almost hurts you how much love you have for them.
Like use these virtues and gems God gave you in the right places when it's really needed, when it actually matters.
If you could try and get to that space and place, you're just constantly and you're emanating that out of you.
That every individual has a presence of God in them. So say for example, if we consider like a pottery maker, so they put a part of their soul, a part of their craft, a part of their essence in every pot they make. I think it's the same with God, right? we all have an essence of God. And that's why we have these different qualities. And I think that's why people encourage you to love yourself. Because at the end of the day, if you don't love yourself, how will you love anybody else? Because you are an essence of God as well. It means that if you're not loving yourself, then you're not loving a part of God.
Different people have different personalities, different traits, different virtues. So ultimately, all of God's names are their virtues, and they're represented in everyone in one way or another. We can't perfectly represent them because that's pretty much impossible, but we strive to perfectly represent them. But in the end, every single one of these virtues is represented in a way or another in each one of us.
So I gave the analogy of a seed for each divine attribute that He has sown into us. We take it as a rose garden, and these seeds are sown in that garden, the soil of our human heart, and then they will blossom as fruitful trees. The fruitful tree meaning that attribute develops and grows within us. These attributes of God He would like us to have. Of course, no matter how perfect we become in the development of those attributes within us and exemplify those virtues and qualities, divine virtues, spiritual qualities and virtues, we still never become the absolute in any sense. Absolute is only a word that relates to God. But He would like us to reflect, once we believe, those qualities and attributes.
There's this idea of like having these qualities that would pain you so much to do, but they in themselves are so glorious that they represent what in Christianity and Judaism and Islam is the Abha kingdom, the golden city that is bejeweled and shines bright, and it's like the sun. Like to have these qualities, utter honesty, utter kindness, tenacity, tact. This is like, if every human being had this, it would be so beautiful, and the world would be like, it would just be so energized, it would shine. And as a Baha'i, we believe that these qualities represent God. We cannot understand it, but we can see God through His qualities. And so if there's a definition of how perfect these qualities, and these qualities are so bright, then I believe that there's a God, because a God is being represented in this world, and it's been defined. And I think that's just, it's beautiful.